In this episode, we're going to make the idea of malware prevention and detection feel practical and understandable, because the word malware is often used like a scary umbrella term that means everything and nothing at the same time. Malware is simply malicious software, and it shows up in many forms, from programs that steal information to code that quietly gives an attacker control of a machine. Beginners sometimes picture malware as a single dramatic virus that announces itself, but modern malware is usually designed to blend in, persist quietly, and do its damage over time. The reason this matters so much in a card data environment is that malware can be one of the fastest ways for criminals to capture sensitive information or disrupt payment operations. When we say prevent and detect before it wrecks you, we mean building layers that stop malware from landing, limit what it can do if it lands, and surface warning signs quickly enough that you can respond before the impact becomes catastrophic. This is less about one magic product and more about a posture that assumes attackers will try to slip malicious code into ordinary work. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting point is understanding how malware actually gets into environments, because that helps you see why prevention cannot be a single control. Malware commonly arrives through email attachments, links to malicious websites, compromised software updates, infected removable media, or stolen credentials that allow an attacker to install tools directly. It can also enter through vulnerable services exposed to the internet, where an attacker exploits a weakness and then drops a payload. None of these paths depend on a user intentionally doing something bad. They often depend on normal behavior, like clicking a link that looks legitimate or running software that seems trustworthy. That is why a mature program treats malware as an expected pressure, not a rare accident. Prevention begins with reducing the number of ways code can enter, and detection begins with the belief that some attempts will succeed, so you need visibility. This mindset keeps you from being surprised when a perfectly reasonable action turns into an infection chain. For beginners, it helps to separate malware into broad intent categories without getting lost in technical jargon. Some malware is focused on theft, like capturing keystrokes, scraping memory, or exfiltrating files. Some is focused on control, like opening a backdoor so an attacker can return later and move around. Some is focused on disruption, like encrypting systems or deleting data to cause downtime and pressure the business. In payment environments, theft-focused malware is especially dangerous because it can capture account data at the moment it is used, even if stored data is well protected. This means you cannot rely on a single protective idea like encrypting databases and assume you are safe, because malware can target the endpoints where the data is briefly visible to legitimate processes. The standards posture expects you to address this reality by hardening systems and monitoring behavior. When you think in categories, you get better at matching defenses to the types of harm you're trying to prevent. Prevention starts with basic hygiene that often sounds too simple until you realize how many infections exploit simple weaknesses. Keeping systems updated, reducing unnecessary software, and disabling features that are not needed can remove common entry points. Attackers love predictable targets, like outdated components or default settings that were never revisited. Another prevention concept is reducing administrative privilege, because malware that runs under a high-privilege account can do far more damage than malware that runs under a limited user. Beginners sometimes assume administrators should always have broad access because they are trusted, but broad access increases the impact of a single compromised credential. So prevention is not only about blocking malware. It is also about limiting the blast radius when something runs that should not. This is why strong configuration and careful privilege design are considered part of malware defense, even though they do not look like antivirus at first glance. Now we can talk about dedicated malware protection mechanisms in a way that stays tool neutral. Most organizations use some form of anti-malware capability that scans files, monitors behavior, and blocks known malicious patterns. The key idea is that protection should be active on the systems that matter, not just installed and forgotten. It needs to be updated so it recognizes current threats, and it needs to be configured so it actually inspects relevant activity. For example, if scanning is disabled on critical paths for performance reasons, you may have created a blind spot right where you need coverage. Another common mistake is assuming that because a system is special, like a payment system, it is safer, when in reality special systems can be high-value targets. Prevention requires consistent coverage across the environment where cardholder data is handled or where compromise could lead to access. When you hear the phrase "before it wrecks you," think about stopping malware early, before it can establish itself and spread. Detection is the partner of prevention because not every malicious action looks like a file that can be scanned. Some malware is fileless, meaning it lives in memory or uses legitimate system tools in a malicious way. Some attackers use stolen credentials and run commands that look like normal administration, at least on the surface. Detection is about watching for behaviors that indicate compromise, such as unusual processes, unexpected network connections, abnormal authentication patterns, or changes to important system settings. Beginners sometimes think detection means waiting for an alert that literally says malware, but real detection is often about a collection of weak signals that, together, indicate trouble. This is why logging and monitoring matters so much, even for malware, because you need records of what happened to piece together whether activity was normal or suspicious. The earlier you detect, the more you can contain, and containment is the difference between a small incident and a wreck. A practical way to understand malware detection is to think in terms of baselines and anomalies. If you know what normal looks like for a system, you can spot when it behaves differently in ways that matter. For example, a server that normally talks only to a database and an internal service should not suddenly be making outbound connections to unknown destinations. A workstation that normally runs Office applications should not suddenly be executing unusual scripts or reaching out to many internal systems. The concept is not to memorize every possible bad behavior, but to build the ability to recognize when something is off. Baselines can be formal, like documented expected communications, or informal, like monitoring trends over time. Either way, detection improves when you are explicit about expected behavior, because then you can flag deviations with purpose. This also ties back to scope and segmentation, because environments that are tightly designed are easier to baseline and easier to monitor effectively. Another essential teaching beat is understanding that malware prevention is not only a technology problem. It is also about human behavior and process. People download software, click links, open attachments, and plug devices into computers, and each of those is an opportunity for malware to enter. That does not mean you blame people, but it does mean you design systems so normal actions are safer by default. You can reduce the ability to run unapproved software, you can limit what macros or scripts can do, and you can separate high-risk activities from sensitive environments. If the payment environment is tightly controlled and ordinary browsing and email are kept away from it, you reduce the chance that a random phishing email becomes a payment system compromise. This separation is a big part of preventing wreck-level incidents, because it keeps the most common infection paths away from the highest impact assets. A mature program assumes humans will be human and builds guardrails accordingly. When malware does appear, the speed and clarity of response often determines whether it becomes a disaster. Detection should feed into a process that triages alerts, confirms whether something is real, and takes containment actions quickly. Containment might mean isolating a system from the network, disabling an account, or stopping a suspicious process, depending on the situation. The important beginner lesson is that response is not a separate topic from prevention and detection. It is part of the same chain. If you detect something but do not act, you have only watched the wreck happen in slow motion. So you build playbooks and responsibilities so that alerts lead to decisions, not confusion. Even in a beginner-friendly view, it is worth appreciating that prevention and detection are only valuable when paired with the ability to intervene. You also need to recognize the special risk malware poses to payment environments where data can be captured during processing. Stored data protections are critical, but malware can target the point where cardholder data is briefly in clear form for legitimate use. This could happen on endpoints, servers, or application components that handle payments, depending on the architecture. That is why the standards expectations around malware defense tend to focus on systems commonly affected by malicious software, especially those that are accessible to users or exposed to external influence. The goal is to prevent attackers from landing code on a system that touches sensitive flows and then silently siphoning value. A zero-doubt posture means you design so that even if an attacker tries to place malware, you have layers that make it hard to succeed and likely to be noticed. The earlier you build this understanding, the less likely you are to overtrust a single protective idea. An often missed aspect of malware defense is ensuring that exceptions do not quietly become the rule. Teams sometimes carve out exclusions because scanning affects performance or because a specialized application behaves oddly when inspected. Exceptions may be necessary in rare cases, but they have to be justified, documented, and compensated for. Otherwise, you create a permanent blind spot. Beginners might assume security is about having a control present, but in practice, it is about how that control is applied and maintained. If your highest value systems are the ones with the most exceptions, you have inverted your protection posture. So a core lesson here is to treat exceptions as security debt, something you pay down with improved design, tuning, or alternative controls. This approach keeps malware defense aligned with reality rather than drifting into paperwork comfort. The last teaching beat is the idea that prevention and detection should be continuous, not occasional, because malware pressure does not take weekends off. Systems change, new software gets added, users join and leave, and attackers adapt quickly. Continuous means signatures and protections are updated, monitoring is active, alerts are reviewed, and periodic checks confirm that protections are still working. It also means that when something is detected, the lessons learned are fed back into improved prevention, like blocking a newly observed technique or tightening a configuration that was exploited. Beginners often think of security as a set of tasks you do once, but malware defense is more like maintaining a healthy immune system. You cannot get vaccinated once for everything forever. You keep improving and watching. That mindset is what turns malware from a wrecking ball into a manageable risk. As you pull all of this together, preventing and detecting malware before it wrecks you becomes a strategy built on layers and speed. You reduce entry points through good hygiene, tight privilege, and careful configuration, so fewer attacks can land successfully. You deploy and maintain anti-malware capabilities where they matter, and you avoid letting exceptions hollow out coverage. You build detection based on behavior and anomalies, not just obvious signatures, and you collect the logs and signals needed to investigate quickly. You connect detection to response, so alerts lead to containment while the incident is still small. And you keep the whole system alive through continuous maintenance, because malware defense is not a one-time purchase, it is an ongoing practice. When you understand these ideas at a beginner level, you are already thinking like a QSA would, because you are focusing on reducing uncertainty and proving that protections are real.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.